So you missed CrowdStrike on its epic run from the 90s all the way to almost $400 a share. And you're wondering, should you be buying this stock hand over fist right now? Or is CrowdStrike gonna go bankrupt? What's going on? I've got you covered. You can see it's down 10.6% today. Now, what's funny about this, I don't mean to pick on you, Jim, but this is absolutely legendary. So just one day ago, Jim Cramer calls the bottom in CrowdStrike stock after global IT outage fallout. And of course, today down 11%.
Let's get to a mad dash. We're going to talk a little CrowdStrike. Of course, the stock, as you might expect, has not been particularly strong after the global outage.
True, but JP Morgan says CrowdStrike delivering a masterclass on incident response. They like that one. UBS, short-term pain priced in, room for upside. How do you like that? And then Morgan Stanley has done key takeaways from global resellers. They like it. So there's a lot of people calling the bottom. So anyway, yeah, I mean, this is maybe not an overreaction because it was really bad, but it does say maybe George Kurtz has really kind of done a great job making everybody feel like, you know what, they're not total losers.
Now, if you're in our Patreon Discord, did a couple live streams. We were covering this as it happened, doing live streams in the mornings. And I told you bad news would come. I'm expecting $250 or less. So today we're getting that $250 or less level because of Delta Airlines. So Delta seeking compensation from CrowdStrike and Microsoft. Delta's handling over 176,000 refund or reimbursement requests. Almost 7,000 flights were canceled. This is just one customer, Delta Airlines. Just a real quick recap of events. So July 19th, this is early in the morning, CrowdStrike released a sensor configuration update. This update triggered a logic error that caused system crashes on impacted machines. About an hour and 20 minutes later, CrowdStrike identified the issue and reverted the changes, but by then, many systems had already been affected. The update impacted Windows 10 and later versions, did not affect Mac or Linux systems. Of course, these have inherently different kernel architecture. Now, you can go down a rabbit hole here and talk about the EU and back in, say, 10, 15 years ago with some regulations. We won't get into that today. This is just the facts, and I want to do a quick overview for those who are asking me about it on YouTube that aren't in our private community. So the immediate impact, 8.5 million devices were affected, leading to outages in various sectors, airlines, healthcare, financial institutions. Delta Airlines was probably the most impacted that we see in the news. So this was really bad. And what we talked about is, well, this is a Friday when it happened. It's going to depend on what we see by Monday morning. Is this all completely resolved? Is it still lingering? Now, from July 19th to 22nd, CrowdStrike and Microsoft worked together to provide steps to basically fix the problem. If you go on to CrowdStrike's website, it has a breakdown of the technical details as well as a statement from the CEO, George Kurtz. Here, Kurtz is apologizing directly for the outage. They're providing continuous updates through their support portal. Nothing is more important to me than the trust and confidence that our customers and partners have put into CrowdStrike. As we resolve this incident, you have my commitment to provide full transparency on how this occurred and steps were taken to prevent anything from happening again. A reminder, this was not a breach. This was an update that impacted Microsoft machines. In our Discord, we do have a channel called CrowdDD, so due diligence for CrowdStrike stock. And it really has a full list of all the events here in detail. Now, one of the things we talked about a few days ago was the language in all contracts. So this is Crowd standard language, essentially saying that CrowdStrike is not liable for indirect, special, incidental, consequential, or punitive damages, limited to the amount paid by customer for a specific product or service, giving rise to the claim during 12-month period immediately preceding the claim. So we know there's going to be concessions. And what I had said here, at a minimum, expect some write-offs and concessions in coming quarters, if not lawsuits that step around the standard language, the T's and C's. Keep in mind that this contract language is negotiated and varies by customer. Larger customers, such as Delta, may have very different limitations or contract language, which we don't have insight to. So just because they have a statement saying that they're not liable, it doesn't mean that Delta can't sue and potentially win. And looking at this, the outages cost Delta an estimated $350 to $500 million. Delta is dealing with over 176,000 refund or reimbursement requests, 7,000 flights, almost 7,000 flights canceled. It's estimated that CrowdStrike incident resulted in a total loss of $5.4 billion for Fortune 500 companies, not including Microsoft. And of course, you saw in the news, there's been a lot of people poking fun at CrowdStrike on the internet. CrowdStrike offers a $10 apology gift card to say sorry for the outage. This is for a $10 Uber Eats card as an apology. Of course, that did not go over very well. Now, here's the deal with CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike is the best of breed when you think of endpoint EDR platforms. So we're talking about cybersecurity endpoint. This is CrowdStrike here on the top right. So going to the right, this is completeness of vision, and then going up is ability to execute, CrowdStrike being the top on both. And Microsoft's right behind CrowdStrike, so Microsoft actually does endpoint security, even though CrowdStrike is what impacted Microsoft machines. And then you have SentinelOne, which of course focuses much more on the SMB, so the small and mid-sized businesses. Now, SentinelOne does have some larger customers, and they are growing more into that space. But if you watch an interview just a year ago from the CEO, he admitted that they have a hard time competing with the big dogs like Microsoft and CrowdStrike. So I do think that SentinelOne can win a couple of deals over this, but I don't think it's going to be as much as maybe the stock price is showing. And one thing to point out, we do own SentinelOne in the community portfolio. So we own both CrowdStrike and SentinelOne in that portfolio. And it wouldn't take a whole lot for SentinelOne to actually move the needle. One or two big deals could be a big impact for a stock like SentinelOne. The reality is that CrowdStrike still is better than SentinelOne, especially when you think for larger customers. Now, with all that said, of course, the sentiment is very bad for CrowdStrike. You're going to continue to see more lawsuits come down the pipe. We also have earnings coming up, which is going to be the end of August. And that's going to be critical because you're going to have the analysts grill CrowdStrike about what's going on with this. Now, I'm sure CrowdStrike's going to be limited in how they can answer, and I really do believe this will drag on for several quarters. The question you have is the stock a buy right now at these prices? The thing about CrowdStrike is it is a SaaS company, recurring revenue. And the stock just absolutely ripped. It was under $100 a share, and it went to almost $400 a share. So there's a lot of air that can come out when you have a big run like that over an 18-month period. Not to mention, it doesn't trade by traditional metrics. Like people want to use something like a PE ratio. Generally, you're going to use cloud SaaS metrics like EV/NTM revenue, Rule of 40, net retention rates, annual recurring revenue, and so on. So right now, CrowdStrike is trading at about 13.5 EV/NTM revenue. Now, it was well above 20 not long ago. It's basically cut its value by 40% since the top. Now, CrowdStrike is one that we liked at $150 or less DCA. We really weren't recommending it over $150. And it feels like not that long ago, it was a $230 stock. And I was saying, it's probably going to go higher, but be careful chasing. And of course, it just kept going higher and higher and higher. Now, fortunately for Fired Up Wealth, we were buying the stock down here in these levels, so we're covered for the most part. But we are getting to the area where it starts to get attractive, even for somebody that wants to DCA up. So looking at this red trend line, that's sitting at about $213. Now, the lowest it got today was $226.22. Today is July 30th, 2024. I think it's possible it could bottom anytime, but it could go much lower. And I do think it's going to see more pressure. That sentiment's going to be a rolling problem for CrowdStrike. The earnings is going to be very critical for CrowdStrike. More lawsuits coming out in the news. Every time you get any kind of news headline, the stock's going to sell off again. So I think it's safe to say with these gap downs and this kind of pressure, this is just a straight elevator drop down that you'll probably see more pressure, and it's going to take some time for this to really work itself out. So I do think there's a good chance you're going to see $200 or less. And I told the gang that before it got to these prices. I was telling them $250. And then last night when we got that Delta news, I said, hey, $200 or less is a strong possibility. Now, it doesn't have to happen. People could come in at $230. But your possibilities are right here, where it's at today, 226, 213 in the trend line, 198 to 200, and then 182.50 is the lowest I see at this point. Not saying it can't go lower, but just from a technical level at this point today. I am bullish on CrowdStrike long term. My cost basis is closer to $100 a share, so I'm not really stressing about it too much. I do think that they'll work themselves out, that this will work itself out over time, but it's going to take time. I wanted to provide my quick take on this, guys. Hope the video is helpful. Please drop me a like, drop me a comment. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.